Will then call the Minister to respond. There will not be an opportunity for the member in charge to wind up, as is the convention for 30 minutes debate. Mr Cruddas.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Charles. This afternoon I want to highlight the financial situation facing the London Borough of Havering, to ask for help, actually, and support from the government, and request a joint approach to remedy the situation and offset the dangers of Section 114, a report by the Council's Chief Financial Officer which effectively freezes all non-statutory spending. And there's obviously a wider national story here. Councils continue to face increasing demands of statutory services, especially in terms of adult and children's social care and the provision of temporary accommodation and homelessness support. Demographic forces are driving up demand for these services and affect some councils more than others. Meanwhile, central government grant funding for councils dropped by some 40% in real terms between 2009-10 and 2019-20, from 46.5 billion down to 28 billion. Consequently, councils are more and more reliant on local funding through council tax and business rates, which has not been enough to compensate for the drop in central government funding. Since 2021, 5 local authorities have declared themselves effectively bankrupt, where their costs are larger than their resources. Slough, Croydon, our neighbours in Thurrock, as well as Woking and Birmingham City, have all issued Section 114 notices. Until recently, 114 notices were generally seen as the result of financial mismanagement or equal pay backlogs. And that is changing, however. It's increasingly likely they will be issued by a significantly larger pool of councils due to a sort of 1-2 punch of demographic changes alongside dramatic shifts in funding. And this combined means a whole series of councils look likely to be trapped in the position where the cost of social care and homelessness are more than their resources. Many are already issuing warnings regarding Section 114. These include city councils such as Sheffield, Coventry, Southampton and Nottingham, district councils such as Mole Valley, Chelmsford, St Albans and South Cambridgeshire, borough councils such as Windsor and Maidenhead, Surrey Heath and Wokingham, county councils such as Hampshire, Kent, Derbyshire and Northamptonshire, alongside councils such as Medway, Bradford, Barnsley, Rotherham and Manchester. This is clearly not a strict party political divide. The lists include councils from across the country, north and south, both urban and rural, led from both left and right. For instance, 1 in 10 of the so-called Sagoma Group, representing 47 urban local authorities, have reported considering making a Section 114 notice this year. 20% say it may be possible within the next year. Similarly, 1 in 10 members of County Council's network have also reported facing effective bankruptcy. Politically, the list includes the Secretary of State for Levelling Up and members of Surrey Heath's own council, as various Labour-led authorities across the country. Yet, despite local authorities' dire financial situation, the autumn statement had no new money for social care services or any general local government funding beyond what was announced last year. However, I should note that the government did increase local housing allowance rates last week, which is to be welcome. So basically, we might conclude that although the language of local government often appears technically complex and incredibly dull and boring, the reality is that much of British local government, a significant portion of the British state, is in danger of literally going bankrupt. This reality stretches way beyond those authorities who have already effectively declared themselves bust. And this has huge implications for our public life across a range of services from refuse collection, housing, homelessness to education, social care, antisocial behaviour, estate management, libraries, youth services, the list goes on. At the same time, it's estimated that some 90% of councils have been using their own reserves to maintain their statutory duties, although some councils are more fortunate than others in this regard, which I'll come to in a minute. Take then the general situation in London. According to London councils, the capital's borough's overall resources remain about 18% lower than 2010-2011. In real terms, over that same period, the population of the borough, the capital, has grown by almost 800,000. London Borough still needs some 500 million of savings for 2024-25 as part of an estimated £2 billion funding gap over the next 4 years. And the next few weeks are critical. Councils will shortly be receiving their settlement figures, probably just as Parliament goes into recess. Following consultation, these figures will then be confirmed in the middle of January, with council taxes being set in early March. And it is against this general backdrop that I want to consider the situation facing Havering. And I should make 3 initial points, Sir Charles, regarding Havering. Firstly, Havering has been very open about its current predicament. In September 2023, the leader of the council, Ray Morgan, warned that the authority could be 6 months away from triggering a Section 114, notice because of the escalating costs of social care and of housing costs. Whilst other boroughs have tried to obscure their financial position and in effect hide from the communities that actually put them in the town hall, Havering from the outset have levelled with residents about what is going on. And I very much welcome this as a sort of mature form of civic leadership. Secondly, Havering is generally regarded as a very well-run and efficient council. It has low borrowing, unlike, say, Croydon or Slough, and they have no historic pay claims, unlike, say, Birmingham. They have the lowest unit costs in London, according to the well-regarded LG Futures consultancy, and they're the 3rd most productive council in the country, according to the consultancy Empower. The situation it faces is very different from its immediate neighbours. Take, for example, the situation of Thurrock, which provided £655 million to companies via bonds, including the purchase of some 53 solar farms. It also shares a border with Barking and Dagenham, which I also partly represent, which has accumulated debt of some £1.2 billion. Havering is in a very different situation and has not embarked on ill-advised speculative activity to try and offset these funding challenges. Thirdly, this is not a party political issue. Until May last year, the borough was Conservative-led authority, and today it's run by 22 representatives of Havering Residents Association, supported by Labour's 9 councillors on the authority. Now, in terms of the scale of the financial challenge facing Havering, we have to bear in mind that local government funding continues to use a distribution model dating from 2013, based on data from the 2011 census. The model is ill-equipped to deal with population flows, the likes of which we've experienced in outer East London over the last decade. Attempts at establishing a revised fair funding formula based on around demographic change and modern need have effectively been parked by the government, with pretty disastrous consequences for boroughs such as Havering. Moreover, the authority has limited resources to help take the strain. Havering's reserves are the 2nd lowest in London, standing at some 47.8 million. Meanwhile, the borough receives the 3rd lowest settlement funding assessment in London, yet remains in the top quartile for income collection. The scale of the problem becomes apparent when you consider demographic pressures they face in terms of adult and children's social care. Put simply, Havering has the 2nd oldest population in London, on the one hand, yet also has the 4th fastest growing children's population in the entire country in terms of those aged 0 to 14. Indeed, in terms of the growth of children's population, the DFEE uses more recent data to allocate children's school-placed capital funding, and for 2025-26, they've allocated Havering a staggering 57% of all of London's schools' basic needs capital funding, demonstrating the extraordinary expansion of the borough's children's population. This statistic shocked me and shows how important it is to use the latest data in distributing our resources. The other 43% is divided up between London's other 33 boroughs. This is just one vivid statistical example of the changing demographics within the capital and Havering's growth and growing numbers of young people and the escalating demands that this takes in terms of statutory expenditure. Now, in terms of the financial situation, Havering is currently forecast an overspend of some 23 million. In terms of their recent track record of budget setting, since 2010 they've delivered a mix of 163 million in terms of savings and income generation, most of which has been reinvested in other services. And they've also sold off 160 million of assets over the last 10 years. And to illustrate the scale of central government reduced support, In 2010-2011, Havering received nearly 100 million in central grant. This was reduced in over a decade to just 37 million in 2023-24. Their budget gap is presently estimated to be some 31.2 million for next year and 77 million over the next 4 years against a net budget of 182 million. Presently, they have the 5th highest council tax in London. Now, I accept for 2023-24, the authority's core spending power was increased by some 18 million, including the council tax social precept. Yet, the pressures from social care were already 20 million in 22-23, so the increased funding did not address additional demand and inflationary pressures for 23-24. In terms of children's and adults' social care costs, it's estimated that the rates paid to providers for adult social care has increased by 33% since 2020, and children's placement costs have risen by 49% over the same period. These rises are partly accounted for by care home costs charged by hedge fund owners. In Scotland, in contrast, to run a care home, you have to be a not-for-profit organisation. Basically, for-profit care is crippling our councils. Placements of our children can cost tens of thousands of pounds a week. And to add to this, Havering's seen a large number of homeless numbers presenting, especially families, partly through the effects of out-of-borough placements by other London local authorities, partly the effects of the housing benefit cap, and partly general migration to outer East London, now costing the authority cumulatively some 3.5 million in accommodation costs. Despite these extraordinary demand pressures, over 80% of their core income now comes from council tax. And to repeat, they receive the 3rd lowest settlement funding assessment in London. Of course I will.
I thank the honourable member for Dagenham Radon for securing this debate. Many of the challenges that he's outlined for Havering are similar to what we experience across the water in Bexley, and I have great sympathy as a former deputy leader of the council for the arguments that he's making. But I wonder if he agrees with me around some of these challenges and this growth that is coming out eastward, as we know, on both sides of the river, whether one way which the government could quickly help get more money out to the likes of Havering and Bexley is to allocate more of the funding that currently goes to City Hall direct to those boroughs.
Cruddas.
I'm not playing past the parcel here. It seems to me, objectively, all parties can agree there's a structural problem which is escalating across the length and breadth of this country. And Havering is sort of where the rubber really hits the wall in terms of the escalating demographic changes, especially for young people, set against a long-term legacy of an older community where you're getting this 1-2 punch in terms of the pressures, in terms of funding our basic statutory reserves. So I'm not going to get into this game. I want to create some sort of cross-party dialogue to create a partnership to resolve these pressures rather than playing sort of tit-for-tat political game. Meanwhile, our health challenges mean additional budget pressures for people coming out of hospitals who need social care. In fact, it would be better for them not to go into hospital at all. But Havering has the lowest number of GPs per head of population in London. So overall, given that Havering had the 2nd lowest level of reserves, the level of their overspend and the forecast budget gap for next year, without additional support, they're warning that they are 6 to 12 months away from issuing a Section 114. So in terms of helping Havering, going back to the point that you raised in terms of how we resolve these situations, fundamentally a fair funding review needs to be implemented, one that better allocates resources based on modern realities of demographic change and need. Now, I accept that will not happen this side of an election. However, may I suggest that any new money the government might allocate does not rest simply on the current funding formula, which is increasingly outdated and further compounds the inequalities in funding. Yet capitalisation orders seem to be the only solution being offered, which Havering will have to take if there's no new money. This penalises one-run councils with an additional 1% added to the Public Works Loan Board rate, a rate which is then fixed for 20 years. Yet this blunt instrument will penalise an ever larger number of residents residing under well-run councils. Perversely, it also means it will increase their debt further each year and mean that we will go back to them year after year. Surely, as more councils are forced to use such orders, we need a more agile system, one that doesn't operate as a form of payday loan operating to pay for our public services. There should be different rules for good councils like Havering. It's clear that there's a broken funding system and it needs to be fixed. Overall, there's a crisis unfolding across local government, one that is captured in well-run authorities like Havering. Can I request urgent discussions to look at these solutions between the national government and our civic leadership to help address looming funding crisis? May I also suggest a more agile capitalisation system which helps rather than further penalises the residents of an increasing number of boroughs who are having to deal with the heightened levels of statutory expenditure. Havering is very much in the eye of the storm, yet they are commendably honest about the scale of the challenge they're facing. And I hope the government is listening and will respond because the clock is ticking. Otherwise, there will be more that follow and we'll see our local communities suffer. I very much look forward to the Minister's response. Thank you, Sir Charles.
Thank you, Mr Cruddas. Minister Hall.
Thank you very much indeed, Sir Charles, and it's a pleasure to serve under your